What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy meets late-night television's most persistent provocateur? What unfolds when decades of professional respect crumble in real time before millions of viewers? You won't believe the explosive confrontation that erupted last night on Jimmy Kimmel Live, transforming what should have been a standard promotional appearance into television history's most uncomfortable celebrity meltdown. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Harrison Ford's legendary temper finally reaches its breaking point. The stage was set for disaster from the moment Ford walked onto that familiar Hollywood Boulevard soundstage. Sources backstage reported that the Indiana Jones star had already seemed agitated during rehearsals, repeatedly checking his watch and making terse comments to production staff about the show's format. What nobody anticipated was how quickly Kimmel's signature brand of irreverent humor would clash with Ford's notoriously short patience for what he considers frivolous entertainment. The interview began innocuously enough, with Kimmel's standard opening banter about Ford's latest projects and his legendary career spanning 5 decades. Ford, dressed in his characteristic dark jacket and maintaining that familiar gruff demeanor, responded with typical one-word answers and sideways glances that have become his trademark on talk show circuits. The studio audience, packed with tourists and die-hard fans, laughed nervously at the palpable tension already crackling between host and guest. But Kimmel, perhaps sensing Ford's discomfort or simply following his natural instinct to push boundaries, began steering the conversation toward increasingly personal territory. "Harrison, you've been in this business longer than some of our viewers have been alive," Kimmel said with that characteristic smirk that has launched 1,000 viral moments. "Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions at this point? Like maybe it's time to hang up the fedora permanently?" Ford's jaw visibly tightened. His hands, which had been resting casually on the chair's armrests, slowly clenched into fists. The camera operator, clearly sensing the shift in energy, zoomed in slightly to capture the subtle transformation in the actor's expression. "I don't think that's really your business, Jimmy," Ford replied, his voice carrying that edge that fans recognize from his most intense dramatic roles. The studio fell uncomfortably quiet. Even the usually supportive house band seemed to sense that something was shifting in the atmosphere. Kimmel, however, either missed the warning signs or chose to ignore them entirely. "Oh, come on, Harrison, we're all friends here," he continued, gesturing broadly to encompass the audience. "I mean, you've made what, like 50 movies? Surely some of them were just paycheck gigs, right? Crystal Skull, anyone?" The mention of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, widely considered the weakest entry in the beloved franchise, was like throwing gasoline on smoldering embers. Ford's entire posture changed. He shifted forward in his chair, fixing Kimmel with a stare that could have melted steel. The studio lights seemed to dim as the weight of his displeasure filled the space between them. "You want to talk about paycheck gigs, Jimmy?" Ford's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that has terrified movie villains for decades. "Let's talk about your paycheck. How much are you making to sit here and insult your guests? Because that's what this is, isn't it? You bring people on here to promote their work, and then you spend the time tearing them down for cheap laughs." The audience's nervous laughter died completely. Even Kimmel's ever-present smile began to falter as he realized he may have pushed too far. The commercial break was still minutes away, and the live television format meant there was no escape from the mounting tension. Camera operators exchanged worried glances, while producers in the booth scrambled to figure out how to handle what was rapidly becoming an on-air disaster. Ford continued, his voice growing stronger and more accusatory with each word. "You think this is entertainment? Making fun of people's life work? These films you're so quick to dismiss. They employed hundreds of people, brought joy to millions of fans, and represented years of hard work from dedicated artists. But sure, let's reduce them to punchlines for your monologue." Kimmel, clearly rattled but trying to maintain his composure, attempted to backtrack. "Harrison, I was just joking around. You know how these shows work. It's all in good fun." But his usual confidence was cracking, and Ford could smell weakness, like a predator sensing wounded prey. The legendary actor leaned back in his chair, but his relaxed posture was deceptive, like a coiled spring ready to explode. "Good fun for who exactly? For you? For your writers who sit in their little room crafting these clever insults?" Or maybe for the network executives who love watching celebrities squirm for ratings. What happened next would seal both men's fate for the remainder of the interview, transforming an already tense situation into something far more dangerous and unpredictable than anyone in that studio could have imagined. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that his usual deflection tactics weren't working, made the catastrophic decision to double down on his approach. With that trademark condescending chuckle that has infuriated countless guests over the years, he leaned forward and said, "Come on, Harrison. You're being a little sensitive here, aren't you? I mean, you're Harrison freaking Ford. You've survived plane crashes, you've made billions at the box office, and you're getting upset about a little joke about Crystal Skull? The internet's been making that joke for 15 years. The mention of his plane crashes, a deeply personal trauma that had nearly killed Ford multiple times, was the match that ignited the powder keg." Ford's face flushed red, and for a moment the studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the camera equipment. The audience, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented, held their collective breath. "My plane crashes." Ford's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of genuine fury. "You want to joke about my plane crashes? About the times I nearly died? About the months of recovery? The fear my family went through?" He stood up slowly, his 6-foot frame towering over Kimmel's desk. "You think that's material for your little comedy show?" Kimmel's face went pale. Even his most controversial moments had never ventured into such genuinely dangerous territory. The studio audience was no longer laughing. They were witnessing something raw and real that had never been intended for public consumption. Producers in the control booth were frantically gesturing to camera operators, unsure whether to cut away or capture every moment of television history in the making. "Harrison, I didn't mean," Kimmel began, but Ford cut him off with a gesture that was pure Han Solo, commanding the Millennium Falcon. "No, Jimmy, you did mean it. This is what you do, isn't it? You find people's pain points and you exploit them for entertainment. My crashes, my age, my career choices, it's all just material for you to mine for laughs." Ford began pacing behind his chair, his movements deliberate and predatory. "But here's what you don't understand about real consequences, about real pain, about real life outside this Hollywood bubble you live in." The studio lights seemed to spotlight Ford as he turned back toward Kimmel, his legendary intensity now focused like a laser beam on the increasingly uncomfortable host. "When you crash a plane, Jimmy, you don't get to reshoot the scene. When you're lying there wondering if you'll walk again, there's no laugh track to make it better. When your family is sitting in a hospital waiting room, not knowing if you're going to make it through surgery, that's not a punchline." Kimmel, clearly out of his depth and facing the full force of Ford's legendary temper, tried desperately to regain control of the interview. "Look, Harrison, I think we're getting a little too serious here. This is supposed to be entertainment. Maybe we should talk about your new project instead." But Ford wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and decades of pent-up frustration with the entertainment industry's superficiality came pouring out. "Entertainment? You call this entertainment? Humiliating people for ratings? Making light of genuine trauma? You want to know what real entertainment is? It's telling stories that matter. It's creating characters that inspire people. It's working with talented artists to make something meaningful." The camera caught Kimmel nervously adjusting his tie, a telltale sign that he was losing control of the situation. His production team was undoubtedly screaming instructions in his earpiece, but Ford's presence was so commanding that even the seasoned talk show host seemed frozen in place. "You sit behind this desk night after night, making fun of people who actually create things," Ford continued, his voice building to a crescendo that filled every corner of the studio. "You mock actors, directors, writers, people who pour their souls into their work, and you think that makes you clever? You think that makes you important?" The studio audience was now completely silent, some visibly uncomfortable with the intensity of the confrontation they were witnessing. This wasn't the playful celebrity banter they had come to see. This was something much more real and much more dangerous. Ford moved closer to Kimmel's desk, his imposing presence making the host seem smaller with each step. "And the worst part, Jimmy, is that you hide behind this facade of being the nice guy of late-night television. At least the other hosts own their cynicism. But you pretend to be everyone's friend while you're sharpening the knives." Kimmel's hands were visibly shaking now as he gripped his index cards. The confident showman who had built a career on quick wit and fearless comedy was completely unprepared for this level of genuine confrontation. His usual arsenal of jokes and deflections was useless against Ford's righteous anger. "You know what the real tragedy is?" Ford's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper again, forcing everyone in the studio to lean forward to hear him. "You had the platform to do something meaningful. You have millions of people watching you every night. You could have used that power to elevate people, to celebrate genuine achievement, to make the world a little bit better. Instead, you chose to tear people down for profit." The tension in the studio was now so thick it was almost suffocating. Even the house band looked uncomfortable, their usual casual demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety about what they were witnessing. What had started as a standard late-night interview had become something none of them had signed up for, a public execution disguised as entertainment. But Ford wasn't done yet, and what he said next would push the situation beyond the point of no return, ensuring that neither man would emerge from this confrontation with their reputation intact. Ford planted both hands firmly on Kimmel's desk, leaning forward until he was inches from the host's face. The cameras captured every detail of this unprecedented moment, the sweat beading on Kimmel's forehead, the fire burning in Ford's eyes, the complete silence that had fallen over what was usually one of television's most boisterous venues. "You want to know the real joke here, Jimmy?" Ford's voice was steady now, controlled, but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "The real joke is that you've spent years building a career on the backs of people who actually have talent, who actually create something lasting, who actually matter, and you've convinced yourself that makes you important." Kimmel tried once more to salvage the situation, his voice cracking with desperation. "Harrison, please, let's just—" "No." The single word cut through the air like a blade. Ford straightened up, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the desk. "I'm talking now. You've had your fun. Now it's my turn." The studio audience was so quiet they seemed to have stopped breathing entirely. "You know what I see when I look at you, Jimmy? I see a man who's never created anything original in his life. You steal other people's content for your monologue. You mock other people's work, and you call it comedy. But real comedy takes courage. Real comedy punches up, not down." The devastating critique hung in the air like a death sentence. Kimmel's face had gone from pale to ashen, his usual quick wit completely abandoned in the face of Ford's relentless assault on his character and career. "And the worst part," Ford continued, beginning to pace again like a caged predator, "is that you've surrounded yourself with people who tell you you're brilliant. Your writers, your producers, your network executives, they all depend on you for their paychecks. So they laugh at your jokes and tell you you're the next Carson. But here's the truth, Jimmy. Johnny Carson lifted people up. He celebrated talent. He made stars. He didn't destroy them for sport." The mention of Johnny Carson, the gold standard of late-night television, was particularly brutal. Everyone in the entertainment industry knew that comparison to Carson was the ultimate measure of success in late night. And Ford was making it crystal clear that Kimmel fell woefully short of that standard. Kimmel, now visibly shaking, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "This is live television, Harrison. Maybe we should—" "This is live television," Ford shot back, his voice rising for the first time since the confrontation began. "Which means for once in your career, you can't edit out the parts that make you look bad. You can't cut to a commercial when someone calls you out. You can't hide behind your writers and your laugh track. This is just you and me, and the truth." The studio was so quiet now that the ambient sound of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Camera operators were capturing every angle, knowing they were documenting something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. In the control booth, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this unprecedented moment play out. Ford walked around the desk, positioning himself directly in front of Kimmel's chair. The physical power dynamic was unmistakable. The legendary action hero towering over the suddenly small-seeming talk show host. "You want to make jokes about my plane crashes? Fine. Let me tell you what I learned lying in that hospital bed, wondering if I'd ever work again. I learned that life is short, that time is precious, and that wasting it on meaningless garbage is the real tragedy." He gestured broadly at the studio around them. "This This whole setup, this fake intimacy, this manufactured controversy for ratings, it's everything that's wrong with this industry. You've turned human connection into a commodity, genuine emotion into content, real pain into punchlines. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came. The confident performer, who had built his reputation on never being at a loss for words, was completely speechless in the face of Ford's withering critique. And you know what the saddest part is? Ford's voice softened slightly, but the intensity remained. You could have been better. You have talent. I've seen glimpses of it over the years. But you chose the easy path. You chose to be mean instead of meaningful, to be cynical instead of creative. The actor began walking toward the edge of the stage, his decision clearly made. I came here tonight to promote a film that hundreds of people poured their hearts into creating. Instead, I've wasted 20 minutes of my life watching you try to diminish something beautiful for cheap laughs. He stopped at the edge of the performance area, turning back one final time to face Kimmel, who remained frozen behind his desk. I'm done, Jimmy. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with this show. And I'm done pretending that what you do here has any value whatsoever. The studio erupted as Ford began removing his microphone. Audience members were on their feet, some applauding, others looking stunned by what they had witnessed. The house band sat motionless, unsure whether to play him off or simply let the moment breathe. You can air this or not, Ford called out as he handed his microphone to a paralyzed production assistant. But if you do, don't edit it. Let people see what really happens when someone finally tells the truth on your show. Kimmel finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Harrison, wait. But Ford was already walking toward the exit, his stride confident and purposeful. He paused at the edge of the stage, looking out at the stunned audience one final time. To anyone out there who creates something real, who tells stories that matter, who uses their platform to lift people up instead of tear them down, keep doing that. The world needs more of that, and less of this. With that, Harrison Ford walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, leaving behind a shell-shocked host, a stunned audience, and what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. The cameras continued rolling as Kimmel sat alone at his desk, the weight of Ford's words hanging over the studio like a storm cloud. The house band finally began playing, but it felt hollow and inappropriate after what everyone had just witnessed. Kimmel attempted to speak, to make some joke or comment that might salvage the situation, but the words wouldn't come. For perhaps the first time in his career, Jimmy Kimmel had been left truly speechless. As the credits rolled and the audience filed out in stunned silence, one thing was absolutely certain. Neither Harrison Ford nor Jimmy Kimmel would ever be the same after this explosive confrontation that had transformed a simple promotional interview into a devastating indictment of everything wrong with modern celebrity culture.